We find ourselves in an unparalleled moment. Fear has gripped our nation, and that fear leads to anger and actions that create more conflict and less solutions. It's disappointing. We've really reduced our debates to a monolithic drone, often with only two choices presented by the media and those shouting the loudest on each side. And anytime someone does stray from that narrative, perhaps in search of common ground, they're quickly attacked from both sides. Sadly, many in the media and politics benefit more from us hating each other than from us actually solving problems. For example, some would have you believe that you have to choose between supporting racial justice and equality or law and order. That we have to choose between defunding and disbanding the police, or we have to blindly defend the police and the policies that have led us to this very moment. That we must choose between oppression and anarchy. The thinking has become one or the other with no room for conversation, and that's not how we're going to overcome these challenges. This is why we're stuck. There's mistrust all over, and fear is as prevalent as I have seen in my lifetime. And in this moment, I think it's incredibly important to discuss the issue outside of sound bites. So here's my take. A few nights ago, as I was trying to sleep, I actually imagined an officer with his knee on my neck, and I felt a real panic. It was a helpless feeling. It was real, genuine fear. While I don't know exactly what George Floyd felt or the pain he endured in those nearly 9 minutes, I was horrified and shaken by the little bit I felt in that moment. That night I was away on military service while my wife was alone in Washington, D.C., where the violence and looting was taking place. I had a real concern for her safety, and I know I wasn't alone in being afraid that night. Being scared takes us down to basic survival mode, and that leads us to feeling defensive with our responses and taking actions out of anger. And this survival mode doesn't allow for any reason or understanding. Now, I admit my horror over George Floyd's death turned into horror over the looting and the burning buildings. I was angry. I know what the National Guard does, and I know who serves in it. I watched as their service was attacked, and I felt a sense of anger in their defense. But yesterday morning, I watched a service by Pastor Mark Batterson that refocused me on the value of every human in the sight of God, and the reality that all of us together make up the body of the church. Here's my point. No one will truly understand the fear of the other because you haven't lived it. I'll never understand what it's like to be a black man walking the streets in fear of being a target simply because of the color of my skin. I'll also never understand the fear of being a police officer afraid of being ambushed on the job or executed by an angry mob. The protest in Houston in 2015 showed us the best and worst of humanity as a gunman emerged during a police protest. Police protected the protesters, and the protesters appreciated the actions of the police. We need to hold those guilty of police brutality accountable 100%. But I think the idea of defunding the police is ridiculous, and it's not a genuine attempt to find a solution. We need the police. And we need to recognize that our police force stands as the thin blue line between order and chaos. I know I've certainly needed the police, and I don't know if I'd be here today without them. In 2006, I was in a fight for my life against a man who had just slit the throat of his girlfriend. I intervened and ultimately disarmed him, but it was the police who arrived quickly on the scene that saved my life and arrested the man for his crime. We need police officers like my friend Mark Dallas. He's a Dixon police officer who responded in under a minute to shots fired at the Dixon High School and stopped what likely would have been another school shooting. We need good police officers, because as I talk about the officers who save lives, I think about George Floyd and the others who've been murdered and targeted by police brutality. The senseless prejudice and violence that further inflames our mistrust and tears open deep wounds. Wounds that people of color continue to carry, wounds that I can never fully understand. To those we can find a solution. To start, let's acknowledge that there's a problem and accept that we have some real work to do in eradicating racial bias. Next, let's figure out how to forgive each other. Let's remember we're all human beings made in God's image, and reaffirm our values of freedom, justice, and equality for all. Let's figure out how to get the screening tools and the proper training to our police officers. And let's also recognize that they have a really tough job. Let's call out bad ideas for what they are, and let's work together for real and achievable solutions. Because if we just go to our corners, nothing's going to get done. Fear is going to grow, and so will conflict. And nobody Nobody wins in that scenario. I believe that we have an incredible opportunity here to fix these very real problems, and we can do that without politics coming into play. So let's do that. Let's do that together. I believe that history will judge this generation as the one that finally took on racism and fear and actually made the world a better, more accepting, and more peaceful place for everybody.